Montana Territory, 1882. The rains came like a biblical plague, swallowing the valley where Zoe Sullivan had staked her claim. Standing on the muddy ridge overlooking what remained of her family's homestead, the 20-year-old widow clutched her sodden shawl against the late spring chill. Her golden hair, usually neatly pinned, hung in damp tendrils against her neck as she surveyed the devastation below. For 3 years since her husband's death, Zoe had fought to keep this land. 3 years of battling drought, frost, and loneliness. Now the Gallatin River had risen with the spring melt and 3 days of relentless rain, sweeping away everything she had built. The cabin, the small barn, the vegetable garden she'd planted just 2 weeks prior, all gone. Only a few fence posts remained, jutting from the swirling water like broken teeth. "You cannot survive alone out here," her father-in-law had warned when he returned east after the funeral. "The frontier breaks men. It will certainly break a woman." Zoe had made those words her challenge, her reason to rise each morning. The West might break men, but it would not break her. Solitude was safer than dependence. Independence meant survival. These truths had become her armor against the world. But now, watching the muddy water claim the last physical remnants of her marriage, Zoe felt that armor cracking. She had nothing left, no shelter, no food stores, not even a change of dry clothing. Just the sodden dress on her back, her husband's pocket watch, and the wedding ring she wore on a chain around her neck. A distant whinny caught her attention. A rider approached along the ridge, silhouetted against the gray sky. Instinctively, Zoe reached for the small revolver tucked in her skirt pocket. Another lesson the frontier had taught her. The rider pulled up 20 yards away. He was young, perhaps 25, with shoulders broadened by work rather than leisure. His hat was pulled low against the drizzle, but she could make out a clean-shaven jaw and eyes that seemed to assess the situation with a single sweep. "Ma'am," he called. "You all right?" As you can see, Zoe gestured toward the flooded valley. "I am perfectly fine." The corner of his mouth twitched. "Of course. Forgive my intrusion." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair and features too fine for the rugged country. "Wade Buchanan. I run cattle on the North Ridge." Zoe had heard of the Buchanan Ranch, one of the more successful operations in the valley, though not large enough to be called a cattle baron. "Zoe Sullivan," she replied. "What's left of the Sullivan homestead is currently at the bottom of that lake." Wade Buchanan's eyes softened with understanding. "The river's taken half the valley. Sheriff's gathering folks at town hall. I volunteered to ride out, check on outlying homesteads." "Well, you've checked. There's nothing to save here." He studied her for a moment. "Mrs. Sullivan, you're soaked through. Night's coming. You need shelter. What I need, Mr. Buchanan, is for you to tell the sheriff I've survived and will make my own arrangements." The cold had settled into her bones, but pride kept her spine straight. "Ma'am, with respect, there are no arrangements to make out here. The stage won't run until the road's dry. The nearest homestead still standing is 5 miles. He glanced at the darkening sky. "And that storm's not finished." As if to punctuate his words, thunder rolled across the valley. The rain, which had briefly lightened, began to fall in earnest again. Wade Buchanan extended his hand. "My place is dry, has food, and my housekeeper will ensure all proprieties are observed. Just until you can make those arrangements you spoke of." Zoe stared at his outstretched hand. Accepting help meant admitting defeat. It meant her father-in-law had been right. Lightning flashed, illuminating what remained of her world. Nothing but mud and angry water. "Mrs. Sullivan," Wade said softly, "even the strongest need shelter from the storm." Something in his voice, free of pity but filled with simple human understanding, broke through her resolve. With reluctance, she placed her gloved hand in his and allowed him to pull her up behind him on the horse. "Hold tight," he instructed as they set off, the animal picking its way carefully along the ridge. Zoe kept her hands lightly at his waist, determined to maintain what little dignity remained to her. "This is temporary," she said, as much to herself as to him. "Once the waters recede, of course," he agreed easily. "Though it might be weeks before that valley's passable again." They rode in silence for a time, the only sounds the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and rain pattering against their clothing. Eventually, a 2-story cabin came into view, lamplight glowing from its windows. A substantial barn stood nearby, and even through the rain, Zoe could make out corrals and outbuildings. a proper ranch, not a mere homestead. As they approached, the front door opened, and an older woman emerged onto the covered porch. "Wade Buchanan, you're soaked clear through," she called. "And you've brought company?" "Mrs. Finch, this is Mrs. Sullivan from the East Valley homestead," Wade explained as he dismounted and helped Zoe down. "The flood's taken everything." The housekeeper's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "Lord have mercy. Come in, child, come in. We need to get you warm and dry." Before Zoe could protest, Mrs. Finch had ushered her inside, fussing over her wet clothes and hair. Wade disappeared to tend to his horse, leaving Zoe in the housekeeper's capable hands. The house was modest but solid, plank floors instead of dirt, glass windows rather than oiled paper, and furniture that spoke of permanence rather than mere functionality. Mrs. Finch led her to a bedroom upstairs, produced a nightgown and robe, and promised to have her clothes dried by morning. "Mr. Buchanan's sister left these when she visited last summer," the housekeeper explained. "She's about your size, I'd wager." Left alone, Zoe peeled off her ruined dress and undergarments. As she changed into the borrowed nightgown, the reality of her situation finally overwhelmed her. Everything was gone. The home she'd built, the garden she'd planted, the future she'd imagined. She sank onto the edge of the bed and, for the first time since her husband's funeral, allowed herself to weep. Downstairs, Wade Buchanan sat before the fire, a cup of coffee warming his hands. The housekeeper moved quietly around the kitchen, preparing a late supper. "That poor child," Mrs. Finch murmured. "To lose everything twice over." Wade looked up. "Twice." Her husband passed 3 years back. "Influenza, from what I heard at church. Left her that homestead and not much else." The older woman shook her head. "Most widows would have gone back east." "Not her." Wade stared into the flames. He'd seen that stubborn pride in Zoe Sullivan's eyes, the determination to stand alone even as the ground washed away beneath her feet. It was a look he recognized all too well. When Zoe finally emerged, dressed in the borrowed nightgown and robe, Wade stood. "Mrs. Sullivan, I hope the room is comfortable." "More than adequate, thank you." Her voice was formal, but her eyes were red-rimmed. "I'll find a way to repay your hospitality once I'm resettled." "No need," he said. "Anyone would do the same." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "We both know that's not true, Mr. Buchanan. Not everyone opens their door to strangers." Mrs. Finch brought out a simple meal of stew and biscuits. As they ate, the conversation remained carefully polite. The weather, the extent of flooding, news from town. Not until the housekeeper had retired and they sat alone by the fire did Wade broach more personal matters. "What will you do now?" he asked quietly. Zoe stared into her teacup. "Rebuild, I suppose. Once the water recedes. That could be months. And you'd be starting from nothing." "I've done it before." Her chin lifted slightly. "After Thomas died, I learned to drive fence posts and chink logs. I can do it again." Wade leaned forward. "Mrs. Sullivan, Zoe," she interrupted. "If I'm to impose on your hospitality, you might as well use my name." "Zoe," he amended. "I admire your determination. But that valley floods every few years. The old-timers, they knew not to build there. Your husband, he likely didn't know." The words struck her like physical blows. "Are you saying Thomas chose poorly? That all our work was doomed from the start?" "I'm saying sometimes we make decisions without all the information we need." Wade's voice remained gentle. "No one told you, and that's a failure of community. We should have warned you." Zoe stood abruptly, wrapping her arms around herself. "Well, the river has certainly warned me now. Excuse me, I should rest." Wade remained by the fire long after she'd gone upstairs, listening to the rain against the windows and wondering about the golden-haired widow who carried her pride like armor. For 3 days, the storm continued. Zoe kept largely to herself, helping Mrs. Finch with household tasks and retreating to her room to mend her salvaged clothing. On the 4th morning, she woke to silence. The rain had finally stopped. From her window, she could see Wade in the yard below, assessing damage to the corrals. Even from a distance, she could appreciate the efficient way he moved, the quiet authority he carried. Several times during her stay, she'd observed him with his ranch hands, not ordering, but guiding, listening as often as he spoke. He was nothing like Thomas, who had been full of grand dreams and sweeping declarations. Wade Buchanan seemed a man of considered action rather than words. When she came downstairs, Mrs. Finch was preparing breakfast. "Good morning, dear. Beautiful day, isn't it? First sunshine in a week." "Indeed." Zoe peered out the window. "Has there been any word from town?" "Billy rode in last night. The stage road's washed out in 3 places. Sheriff says it'll be at least 2 weeks before regular travel resumes." The housekeeper placed a plate of eggs and bacon on the table. "Eat up now. No sense in worrying on an empty stomach." 2 weeks. Zoe's heart sank. 2 weeks of charity, of dependence, of being indebted to a man she barely knew. The front door opened, and Wade entered, removing his hat. "Morning," he greeted. "Fine day. Thought I'd ride out, check on your property, see what's left." "I should come with you," Zoe said immediately. Wade hesitated. "It's going to be rough country, with mud and debris." "It's my land, Mr. Buchanan. I need to see it." Something in her tone must have conveyed her determination, for he nodded. "Very well. We'll leave after breakfast." An hour later, they rode double on Wade's sturdy gelding, following the ridge that overlooked what had been the Sullivan homestead. The valley below remained largely underwater, though the river had receded enough to reveal the extent of devastation. Debris littered the landscape. Logs, furniture, even the carcass of a cow lodged against a stand of cottonwoods. "There," Zoe pointed. "That's where the cabin stood." Nothing remained but a jumble of logs and a single chimney stone, like a grave marker for all she had built. "I'm sorry," Wade said quietly. "It was just a place," she replied, though they both knew it was a lie. It had been her home, her independence, her proof that she could survive alone. "Zoe," Wade began carefully, "I have a proposition. The northeast section of my property, it's higher ground, good water. I've been meaning to develop it, maybe build a line cabin. If you're set on rebuilding, that would be safer land." She turned to look at him, suspicious. "You're offering me land?" "What? Not offering. Leasing. For a fair price." He met her gaze steadily. "This isn't charity. It's business. I could use the help come branding season, and you need a place that won't wash away with the spring melt." Zoe studied him, trying to discern his true motive. "And what would your neighbors say? A single woman living on your property. They'd say I made a smart business arrangement." A slight smile touched his lips. "Besides, Mrs. Finch would chaperone your reputation quite fiercely, I assure you." For the first time since the flood, Zoe felt a flicker of hope. Land that wouldn't flood. A fresh start, with her dignity intact. "I'll consider it," she said finally. As April turned to May, Zoe's consideration became a decision. Wade helped her stake out 5 acres on the northeast ridge, and together with 2 ranch hands, they began construction of a small cabin. To maintain propriety, she continued to stay in Wade's home, but each day rode out with him to work on her new place. She insisted on doing her share, selecting logs, helping to notch corners, chinkling the spaces between. When Wade suggested hiring the work done, she refused. "If I'm to live in it, I should help build it," she declared, pushing a strand of hair from her perspiring face. Wade watched her work, impressed despite himself. Most women of his acquaintance would have fled back east after such misfortune. But Zoe Sullivan faced adversity with a quiet determination that matched his own. One evening, as they rode back to the main house, Wade broached a subject that had been troubling him. The town's organizing a spring dance next Saturday. First social gathering since the floods. "That's nice," Zoe replied absently, her mind on the cabin's roof, which they would begin tomorrow. "I thought you might like to attend." "With me?" Her head snapped up. "With you? As neighbors? Friends?" He kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "Nothing improper." Zoe was silent for so long that Wade feared he'd offended her. "Finally," she said, "I don't have anything suitable to wear." It wasn't a refusal. Wade felt an unexpected lightness in his chest. "Mrs. Finch mentioned the dressmaker in town received new fabric last week. We could ride in tomorrow, if you'd like. I couldn't ask you to. Consider it in advance on your wages for helping with the branding." She sighed. "You've grown quite skilled at disguising kindness as business, Mr. Buchanan." He smiled. "I'm a rancher. We're practical folk." The social hall in town was festooned with spring flowers when Wade escorted Zoe through the doors the following Saturday. She wore a simple blue dress that brought out the cornflower color of her eyes, her golden hair arranged in a neat chignon. Beside her, Wade felt awkward in his best shirt and string tie, suddenly aware of every callus on his hands. Conversation faltered as they entered, then resumed with increased fervor. Zoe felt the weight of curious stares and whispered speculation. Her chin lifted. "Everyone's looking," she murmured. "Let them look," Wade replied, offering his arm. "Would you care to dance, Mrs. Sullivan?" The music was provided by a fiddler and a man on piano, playing a simple waltz. Wade led her onto the floor with more grace than she had expected from a cowboy, his hand warm at her waist. "You dance well," she observed, surprised. "My mother insisted. Said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like a bear with a sore paw." A shadow crossed his face. "She passed when I was 16. Influenza. I'm sorry." Zoe's expression softened. "It seems we've both known loss." As they turned about the floor, Sheriff Davis approached, a tall man with a silver mustache at his side. Wade nodded in greeting, but kept dancing until the music ended. "Buchanan," the sheriff said. "Mrs. Sullivan, glad to see you're well. This is Mr. James Harrington, just arrived from back east, buying up flood-damaged properties for his railroad company." The businessman extended his hand to Zoe. "Mrs. Sullivan, I've heard about your misfortune. Perhaps we could discuss your property? The railroad is offering quite generous terms for land in that valley." Zoe stiffened. "My land isn't for sale, Mr. Harrington. With respect, ma'am, I understand there's nothing left. Surely you'd prefer cash in hand to a mud pit." Before she could reply, Wade stepped slightly forward. "Mrs. Sullivan is rebuilding on higher ground. If you're looking for land to purchase, I suggest the Peterson place. I hear he's considering offers." The businessman's eyes narrowed. "I see. Well, should you reconsider, Mrs. Sullivan, my offer stands. Good evening." As he walked away, Zoe exhaled slowly. "Thank you. Though I could have handled him myself." "No doubt," Wade agreed. "But his kind don't always listen to a woman, no matter how firmly she speaks." For the remainder of the evening, they danced, spoke with neighbors, and shared punch under the watchful eye of Mrs. Finch, who had accompanied them as chaperone. When it was time to leave, Zoe found herself reluctant for the evening to end. "It was a lovely dance," she said as Wade helped her into the wagon. "It was." He settled beside her and took up the reins. "Though I imagine tongues will be wagging tomorrow." "Let them wag," Zoe replied, echoing his earlier sentiment. "We've done nothing wrong." As May turned to June, Zoe's cabin neared completion. The roof was on, the door hung, windows installed. Only finishing touches remained. With each passing day, she felt a growing conflict, pride in the home she was building, yet reluctance to leave the comfortable routine she'd established at the Buchanan ranch. She'd begun helping Wade with his accounts, discovering a knack for numbers that complemented his practical knowledge of cattle. Their evenings had fallen into a pattern: dinner with Mrs. Finch, then reading or conversation by the fire. Sometimes Wade would play the harmonica, a skill he'd learned from his father. Other times, they simply enjoyed comfortable silence, each with a book. "You don't have to rush to move out," Wade said one evening as they discussed the final details of her cabin. "Stay through the branding. It would be easier." "People will talk," she reminded him. "People already talk." He set aside his book. "Zoe, I've been meaning to ask, your husband. What was he like?" The question surprised her. "Thomas?" He was enthusiastic, full of dreams. He saw the West as a great adventure. She twisted her wedding ring, still worn on the chain around her neck. He wasn't prepared for the reality of it. "Few are," Wade acknowledged. "Is that why you stayed?" To prove his dreams weren't foolish. Zoe considered this. "Perhaps. At first. Then it became about proving something to myself, that I didn't need anyone, that I could stand alone. And now," her eyes met his, "now I'm not certain that standing alone is the victory I once thought it was." The next morning, they rode out early to check cattle in the north pasture. The air was sweet with spring growth, meadowlarks calling from fence posts. As they crested a hill, Wade pulled up, pointing to a disturbance in the herd below. "Something spooked them," he said, frowning. "Let's check." They rode closer, and Zoe spotted movement in the brush. "There, at the creek line." Wade's expression darkened. "Rustlers. Stay here." Before she could protest, he urged his horse forward, reaching for the rifle in his saddle scabbard. Zoe watched in alarm as 3 men emerged from the brush, driving half a dozen Buchanan cattle. One spotted Wade and shouted a warning. Gunfire erupted. Wade's horse reared, nearly unseating him. Zoe's heart leaped into her throat as she saw him clutch his upper arm, blood spreading across his shirt sleeve. Without thinking, she spurred her mount forward, reaching for the small revolver she still carried. One of the rustlers turned toward her, raising his weapon. Zoe fired first, her bullet going wide but startling the man enough that his own shot missed. Wade had regained control of his horse and fired his rifle one-handed, hitting one rustler in the leg. The wounded man screamed, toppling from his saddle. His companions abandoned both him and the cattle, galloping away across the pasture. Wade, Zoe reached his side, horrified by the blood soaking his sleeve. You're hurt. It's nothing, he grimaced. Caught the edge of my arm. Nothing? You're bleeding like a stuck pig. She tore a strip from her petticoat. Hold still. As she bound his wound, the injured rustler moaned on the ground nearby, clutching his thigh. Wade glanced toward him. We need to get him to town. Doctor should look at both of us. You first, Zoe insisted. He tried to steal your cattle. Despite the pain, Wade chuckled. Your frontier justice needs refinement, Mrs. Sullivan. They managed to get the rustler onto his horse, which Wade led while Zoe rode close beside him, watching his face grow increasingly pale. By the time they reached town, he was swaying in the saddle. Dr. Williams examined both men, declaring the rustler's wound painful but not life-threatening. He'll heal up fine in the jail, the doctor pronounced, nodding to Sheriff Davis, who had arrived to take custody. Wade's injury was more concerning. Bullets scraped the bone, Dr. Williams explained to Zoe, who had refused to leave the examination room. I've cleaned it, but there's risk of infection. He'll need careful tending. I'll tend him, Zoe said firmly. For the next week, Wade was confined to bed, fevering intermittently as his body fought infection. Zoe barely left his side, changing bandages, coaxing him to drink broth, reading aloud when he was lucid enough to listen. Mrs. Finch brought meals and fresh supplies, but it was Zoe who maintained the vigil. On the 7th night, his fever finally broke. Zoe, dozing in a chair beside his bed, woke to find Wade watching her, his eyes clear for the first time in days. You're still here, he murmured. Of course I am, she replied, reaching to feel his forehead. Your fever's down. You saved my life. Zoe shook her head. The doctor saved your life. I just changed bandages. You rode toward gunfire, Wade insisted. For me. She busied herself straightening his blankets. Yes, well, it would have been inconvenient if you died. I'd have to find somewhere else to live. A weak smile touched his lips. Heaven forbid you be inconvenienced. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a truth neither had been ready to acknowledge. Zoe, Wade began, but she stood abruptly. You should rest. Doctor said you'll need your strength to recover. She moved to the door. I'll bring some broth later. As she closed the door, Zoe leaned against the wall, her heart racing. The truth she'd been avoiding crashed over her. Somewhere between the flood and the gunfight, she had fallen in love with Wade Buchanan. The realization terrified her. Love meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant the potential for loss. And she had lost too much already. July arrived with scorching heat and the branding roundup. Though still weak from his injury, Wade insisted on participating. Zoe, who had moved into her completed cabin 2 weeks prior, rode over each day to help with meals for the cowhands and to keep the ranch accounts updated. One evening, as the work wound down, she found Wade sitting alone on the porch, staring out at the sunset. He looked thinner than before his injury, but color had returned to his face, and his movements, though careful, were stronger each day. Mrs. Finch sent me with coffee, she said, offering him a cup. Thanks. He gestured to the empty chair beside him. Join me. Zoe hesitated, then sat, cradling her own cup. The branding's gone well. You'll be finished by the end of the week. Thanks to your help. Wade studied her over the rim of his cup. You've been avoiding me. She glanced away. I've been busy with my cabin. Zoe. His voice softened. What are you afraid of? The directness of his question caught her off guard. I'm not afraid. I'm being practical. The cabin's finished. It was time to move in. That's not what I meant. Wade set his cup aside. Since I was injured, you've kept your distance. What? Zoe stared into her coffee. Because I realized something when you were shot. Something I'd been trying not to see. And what was that? Her eyes lifted to his. That I care what happens to you. More than I should. Is that so terrible? It is if I've built my life around not needing anyone. Her voice caught. I watched Thomas die, Wade. I held his hand while fever took him. I can't. I can't do that again. Wade was silent for a moment. Then, carefully, he reached for her hand. My father taught me something about ranching. He said, son, you can build the strongest fences, hire the best hands, pray for perfect weather. But in the end, this life is always a gamble. The only choice is whether to play the hand you're dealt alone or with someone beside you. His thumb traced circles on her palm. I've been playing alone a long time, Zoe. I thought that was strength. Now I'm not so sure. Tears filled her eyes. What if I lose you too? What if you don't? He countered. What if, instead, we build something together that neither of us could create alone? The question hung between them, filled with possibility. Before she could answer, a rider approached at speed, pulling up in the yard. It was Billy, one of Wade's hands, his expression grim. Boss, got trouble. Harrington's railroad men are over at Mrs. Sullivan's place, tearing down her cabin. Zoe gasped. What? What? Don't know, ma'am. Sheriff sent me to fetch you both. They rode hard, Zoe's heart pounding with fear and fury. As they approached her cabin, she saw a group of men dismantling the porch she'd built just last week. James Harrington stood nearby, directing the work. What is the meaning of this? Wade demanded as they dismounted. Harrington turned, unsurprised by their arrival. Ah, Buchanan. Mrs. Sullivan. Simply claiming what's legally mine. This land belongs to Wade, Zoe protested. I'm leasing it from him. No, Mrs. Sullivan. This section was sold to my company yesterday. Harrington produced a deed, signed by one Thomas Sullivan. Zoe snatched the paper from him, scanning it in disbelief. This is impossible. Thomas never owned this land. But he did. Harrington's smile was cold. He purchased it from the previous owner shortly before your marriage. Paid half, with the remainder due after 3 years. When that payment never came, the original owner contacted my company. We settled his claim and now hold legal title. Zoe turned to Wade, her face ashen. I didn't know. Thomas never told me. Sheriff Davis rode up, looking uncomfortable. I've examined the deed, Buchanan. It appears legal. Your father sold this parcel to Sullivan 6 years ago. Wade's expression hardened. My father never mentioned it. It was a private arrangement, apparently. Small section, not documented with the county until recently. The sheriff shrugged apologetically. Laws on Harrington's side here. Zoe felt her world collapsing for the second time. The cabin she'd built with her own hands, the fresh start she'd worked so hard for, all being dismantled before her eyes. You can't do this, she whispered. I assure you, I can. Harrington gestured to his men to continue working. But I'm not unreasonable. I'll compensate you for improvements to the property, and my previous offer for your valley land still stands. Wade stepped forward. This is my family's ranch. I'm not letting you tear down a cabin on Buchanan property, deed or no deed. Careful, Buchanan, Harrington warned. Interfering with legal business could land you in jail. Besides, the railroad's coming whether you like it or not. This is just the beginning. Eventually, I'll own every inch of this valley. Zoe placed a restraining hand on Wade's arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. Wade, don't. It's not worth it. Listen to the lady, Harrington smirked. She's smarter than you give her credit for. With a curt nod to the sheriff, Harrington returned to supervising the demolition. Wade led Zoe away, his jaw clenched in fury. We'll fight this, he promised once they were out of earshot. There must be a way. But Zoe knew better. She had seen enough frontier justice to understand that paper and money usually prevailed over principle. It's gone, Wade. Just like everything else. Not everything. He took her hands. You still have me. The simple declaration broke something inside her. With a sob, Zoe pulled away. I can't do this again. I can't build and lose, build and lose. I'm going back east. My sister in Boston has offered me a place many times. I should have accepted years ago. Wade stared at her in disbelief. You're leaving? Just like that. What's left for me here? Every time I try to stand on my own, the ground shifts beneath me. We could stand together, he argued. My home is yours, she finished for him. Not mine. Never mine. I'm tired of borrowing a place in the world, Wade. I need something that's truly mine. His face closed. I see. Well, I won't keep you against your will. The stage leaves tomorrow. I'll see that you're on it. The finality in his voice cut deeper than she'd expected. But Zoe had made her decision. The West had taken everything from her twice over. She wouldn't give it a third opportunity. The following morning, Wade drove her to town in silence. Her few possessions were packed in a single trunk. Mrs. Finch had cried when saying goodbye, pressing a package of food for the journey into Zoe's hands. At the stage depot, Wade unloaded her trunk, then stood awkwardly before her. "I wish you wouldn't go." "I have to." Zoe fought to keep her voice steady. "Thank you for all you've done." "Zoe," he hesitated, then reached into his pocket. "I want you to have this." He pressed a folded document into her hand. "Open it later." Before she could respond, the stagecoach arrived in a cloud of dust. Passengers disembarked, luggage was shuffled, and moments later, the driver was calling for boarding. "Goodbye, Wade," Zoe whispered, then turned and climbed into the coach without looking back. It wasn't until they were miles from town that she unfolded the paper Wade had given her. It was a deed to 20 acres of Buchanan Ranch land, legally transferred to her name. Attached was a note in Wade's neat hand. "This land is yours, no matter what. If you choose to return, it will be waiting. As will I. Some things even the railroad can't take." Tears blurred her vision as the stagecoach rumbled eastward. The journey to Boston was long and arduous, giving Zoe ample time to contemplate her decision. Each mile that carried her farther from Montana brought not relief, but a deepening sense of loss. By the time she reached her sister's comfortable home in Cambridge, she felt hollow inside. Martha welcomed her with open arms, introducing her to a social circle of proper Bostonians who viewed the West as a savage curiosity. At teas and dinner parties, Zoe found herself treated as a novelty, the brave widow who had survived the wild frontier. "How exotic to live among the cowboys," one matron exclaimed. "Were you very frightened?" "Not of the cowboys," Zoe replied, "only of the loneliness." Weeks passed. Autumn painted the Boston Commons in crimson and gold. Martha, concerned by her sister's quiet melancholy, arranged an introduction to a respectable widower, a banker with thinning hair and soft hands that had never known calluses. "He's very interested in you," Martha confided after one such meeting. "He could provide a comfortable life, Zoe." Comfort. Security. The very thing she had sought when fleeing Montana. Yet Zoe found herself missing the vast sky, the scent of sage after rain, the honest weariness that came from work done with her own hands. And most of all, she missed Wade, his quiet strength, his unwavering support, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. One evening, as the first snow of winter dusted the city streets, Zoe retrieved Wade's deed from her trunk. The paper had become worn from frequent handling, the creases soft with use. She traced his signature with her fingertip, remembering his words, "This land is yours, no matter what." In that moment, clarity washed over her. She had spent years believing that independence meant standing alone, that needing others was weakness. But true strength came not from isolation, but from the courage to build connections despite the risk of loss. The next morning, Zoe announced her decision to return to Montana. "But why?" Martha cried. "Winter's coming. Wait until spring at least." "I can't wait," Zoe replied simply. "I've already lost too much time." The return journey was even more difficult than her departure had been. Snow blocked mountain passes, forcing delays. When at last the stagecoach pulled into the familiar frontier town, it was Christmas Eve, and Montana lay under a blanket of pristine white. Zoe stepped down into ankle-deep snow, her heart pounding. The town had changed little in her absence. The general store decorated with pine boughs, lanterns glowing in frosted windows. She inquired after a room at the hotel, only to learn it was fully booked for the holiday. "Could try Mrs. Finch," the clerk suggested. "She sometimes takes boarders." "No," Zoe said, making a sudden decision. "I need a horse." And directions to the Buchanan Ranch. The clerk raised his eyebrows. "Ma'am, it's near nightfall. Storm coming in from the north. Not safe to ride out now." "Nevertheless, that's what I intend to do." An hour later, wrapped in every warm garment she could purchase or borrow, Zoe rode north on a sturdy mare. Snow began to fall more heavily, the wind picking up as darkness descended. Several times she feared she had lost the trail, but the mare seemed to know the way, plodding steadily through deepening drifts. At last, a light appeared in the distance, a lantern hanging on a porch. As she drew closer, Zoe recognized the Buchanan Ranch house, smoke curling from its chimney against the night sky. She had come home. Dismounting stiffly, she tied the mare to the hitching post and approached the door. Her gloved hand was raised to knock when it suddenly swung open. Wade stood framed in the doorway, a look of utter disbelief on his face. Zoe. Hello, Wade. She managed, suddenly uncertain. I hope I'm not intruding. For a heartbeat, he simply stared at her. Then, without a word, he stepped forward and pulled her into his arms, holding her as if he feared she might vanish like a mirage. You came back, he whispered against her hair. Why? Zoe pulled away just enough to look up into his face. In the lamplight, she could see new lines around his eyes, a weariness that hadn't been there before. Because I realized something important. When the flood came, I lost everything I owned. But it was only when I left Montana that I lost everything that mattered. Wade's hands framed her face. And what matters, Zoe Sullivan? This land, this life. She covered his hands with her own. And you, Wade. Most of all, you. His smile was slow, transforming his entire face. I was hoping you might say that. Reaching into his pocket, he withdrew a small box. I've been carrying this since September, waiting for you to come to your senses. Inside the box was a simple gold band. Zoe's breath caught. I'm not Thomas, Wade said softly. I can't promise grand adventures or easy days. But I can promise this. Whatever comes, flood or drought, bounty or hardship, you'll never face it alone again. Tears filled Zoe's eyes as she took the ring. That's the only promise I need. As snowflakes swirled around them, Wade drew her into the warmth of the house, closing the door on the winter night. Inside, Mrs. Finch exclaimed in delight, hastening to prepare hot coffee and Christmas pie. The housekeeper's eyes glistened as she watched Wade slip the ring onto Zoe's finger. I knew you'd come back, the older woman declared. Told him so every day. Did you now? Wade's arm remained around Zoe's waist, as if afraid she might disappear again. Indeed I did. Said a woman who rides toward gunfire for a man doesn't just forget him. Mrs. Finch nodded sagely. Now sit down, both of you. Supper's ready, and we've reason to celebrate. Later, as they sat before the fire, Zoe told Wade of her months in Boston, the emptiness she had felt, the realization that had brought her back. I thought independence meant never needing anyone, she explained. But that's not strength, it's fear. Real courage is knowing you might lose everything, and building anyway. She smiled up at him. Loving anyway. Wade's answer was to pull her closer, his kiss saying everything words could not. Spring came early that year, melting snow and swelling creeks. The railroad did come through the valley, but not through Buchanan land. Wade and Zoe had married in January, in a simple ceremony attended by their neighbors. By March, they had begun construction on a new home, larger than her cabin had been, situated on the 20 acres Wade had deeded to her. Our land now, he reminded her as they laid the cornerstone together. When the Gallatin River rose again with the spring melt, it stayed within its banks. Zoe stood on the ridge beside her husband, watching the water flow peacefully below. Strange to think that flood brought us together, she mused. Wade's arm tightened around her waist. Perhaps losing everything was the only way you'd learn to accept having everything. Zoe laughed, leaning into his embrace. When did cowboys become philosophers? About the same time stubborn widows learned to trust again, he replied, his eyes warm with love. As they walked back toward their home, their true home, built not just of logs and stone, but of shared dreams and mutual strength, Zoe realized that the frontier hadn't broken her after all. It had simply taught her that the greatest safety wasn't found in independence, but in the courage to join her life with another's. The West demanded much, but it gave even more to those brave enough to risk their hearts.